Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone, and we're going to need it after what Joe Biden just did. President Biden delivering the ultimate Christmas present, not to the American people, not to all of us, but to Big Pharma, and decapitating the MAHA agenda in one fell swoop. This is something these big pharmaceutical corporations have been lobbying the Biden administration to do ever since Trump's win. They went into overdrive. We reported on this a few weeks ago, and we said that there was no way Joe Biden would capitulate to this. This is one step too far. Well, he did. We're going to explain, but before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps out the channel. And consider subscribing so you don't miss these regular updates. So with just 3 weeks left in Joe Biden's term, this lame duck president continues to make a mockery out of the presidency and give a giant middle finger to the American people, capitulating to the Big Pharma lobby yesterday, something we've been reporting on that since Donald Trump won the presidency and swept the Congress, announcing RFK Jr. will be his Secretary of HHS, and that he and RFK are going to be making America healthy again with the MAHA agenda. Big Pharma has been in a panic, an absolute panic, ramping up their lobbyists in D.C., trying to get the White House to convince Joe Biden to extend their immunity protection for the jab. Well, guess what, folks? He just did that. Joe Biden officially extending immunity protection, ultimate immunity for Pfizer, AstraZeneca, for all the big pharmaceutical companies, now having immunity until guess when? 2029, the year Trump leaves office. This is what corporate capture looks like in our federal government. Our president doing the bidding of Big Pharma. It's disgusting. Watch this.
In yet another move to hamstring the MAGA agenda, Joe Biden's Department of Health and Human Services just extended the liability shield for COVID vaccine makers through the end of, we'll let you guess, 2029, the year that Trump will leave office. What are they shielding manufacturers from if these vaccines are so safe?
Plus, HHS's vaccine injury compensation program still doesn't cover injuries from the COVID vaccine. However, a different, little-known government program can, but it's being slow-walked. Fewer than 3,500 have decisions.
And of those decisions, 18 claims have been compensated. 3,373 have been denied. Joining us now, a member of the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic and a former emergency room doctor, Congressman from Georgia, Rich McCormick. A doctor and congressman, great to see you. So if these COVID vaccines will continue until 2029, will continue to fall under this program, which you do not get reimbursement if you're one of the few that HHS decides in favor of, you get no pain and suffering. What's Biden and co. up to with this decision?
Well, it's not just that. If you look at the way they designed this, you have no repercussions. You can't sue these companies who have come up with these vaccinations that may or may not be harmful. But this is why we make decisions with our doctors and suffer the consequences. But we've held cigarette companies accountable. You just did a report on holding oil companies responsible for global warming, right, that they can be sued for that. And then you're going to say you can't hold people who actually have real manifestations of physical harm from vaccination for young, healthy people a lot of times that should have no business of getting a vaccination when they have immunity already, and you're not going to hold them accountable. This is ridiculous double standards, and it shows you who they're favoring and who they're playing politics with. And quite frankly, we just did a hearing in which 40% of this year's FEMA budget was diverted to, guess what? COVID.
So let me get this straight. After the American people just went through 4 years of the worst abuse and psychological torture, the pandemic during Joe Biden's presidency, where the federal government played politics, power politics, that's what that was, enforcing their will over all of us, over the American people. Joe Biden granting himself additional powers via fiat with state of emergencies, mandating the jab to all federal employees. Try to understand what this means. The Biden administration mandates the jab to all federal employees, to every member of the U.S. military. That's over 3 million Americans who were forced to get the jab, even if they didn't want to, even if they didn't feel comfortable doing so, even if they exercised their constitutional rights to be granted a religious exemption or some other kind of exemption. Government, in many cases, still mandated it. In fact, it wasn't only federal workers. On September 9th, 2021, President Biden, he announced sweeping jab mandates for all employees of companies with over 100 workers. They went like full North Korea on us, folks. And for anyone who says, oh, that's not true, they weren't forced, they could have just quit their job. Yes, I suppose that's right. They could have quit their job. Do you have a family? Do you have children that depend on you? Do you depend on the health care coverage and the paycheck and the other benefits? Well, most people do. So yes, I'm comfortable saying they were forced into it. It's still on the Department of Defense website. This is on their website to this day. Service members must be jabbed or face consequences. DoD officials say Defense Department officials are making it excruciatingly clear that no matter the status, if you wear the cloth of the military, you must be jabbed. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has mandated that all service members receive the life-saving jabs. This includes all reserve component members who must receive the jabs as well. John Kirby, Pentagon spokesperson, is quoted here saying it is a lawful order. John Kirby said today it is a valid military requirement to get the jab, and it does apply, as we've said before, to the members of the National Guard. National Guardsmen who refuse to get the jabs face repercussions and consequences. This includes loss of pay or the loss of the ability to train. Those who persist in failing to obey a lawful order face discharge. Well, now, after the last 4 years of hell, where people feel as if they were wronged by the federal government, by the political forces at play, because, again, that's what this was, power politics. After 4 years of this, President Biden is leaving office giving a final FU to every single American, a giant middle finger in all of our faces by caving to the Big Pharma lobby and extending their immunity protection until 2029, the year Donald Trump leaves office. You can't make this up. And Donald Trump can't just wave this away, folks. This is something that's final. The only way to get around this would be for Congress to write some new legislation overriding it. And even with the majority in both chambers now of Congress, you have enough rhinos in the Senate who you could bet will just stand in the way. Watch this.
Still this year, the pandemic's been over for a couple of years. And I'm an ER doc. I served my last shift about December 28th, 2 years ago. And you know that this pandemic's over, but yet we're still spending 40% of FEMA during a year where we had shortfalls in the budget for hurricanes on something that's been over for a couple of years. Shame on us. We need to hold these people accountable.
Well, all this money gets shifted around in the background, and almost nobody knows about it, which is why you need something like DOGE to take a huge, massive floodlight and shine it in here. And then you've got all these alphabet soup agencies that administer these different things. Here's my question. Can you roll these late stage decisions back? Can Trump come into office and say 2029, forget about it? We're going to rescind that. We're going to repeal it. Or can Congress do that? Who can act on this?
I think we're going to have to come to agreements on it. I think now that we have the trifecta, we have so much work to do. Matter of fact, the biggest thing that's going to hamstring us is how much we have to actually accomplish in this first 100 days. How are we going to pass a CR? Are we going to pass a skinny? We're going to do 2 reconciliation bills. The last time we actually got it done right was about 30 years ago. I believe it was 1997. We have a tremendous amount of work to do. We have a very narrow margin in the House, more narrow than the Senate. That should mean something to a lot of people. There's a lot of fighting to be done, so don't think it's over yet. But if we can get it right, we might just save America.
Yeah, and don't force people to ever take a jab in their arm ever again. Because in New York City, companies and individuals, if they wanted to go into the workplace, were forced to get the COVID vaccine. Never again. Never again. I will go jobless before I do that again. Dr. Rich McCormick, thank you so much.
Amen. And we have to realize, when the pandemic first started, it was under the Trump administration. The massive push we saw to escalate government action around the pandemic, in my opinion, was purely political. Democrats knew it was an election year. They wanted Americans to feel as unhappy and scared as possible in those final months. Politicians always look at the right track, wrong track numbers. Right track, wrong track polling is followed extremely closely in presidential politics. If the American people think the country is moving in the wrong direction, or rather the right direction, there's a good chance the party in power will win the election. If they feel the country is moving in the wrong direction, there's an even greater chance the party in power will lose the election. Well, Donald Trump was in power. So you saw legacy media like CNN covering the pandemic 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, having a real-time death toll ticker and tracker on their airwaves right up until election.
More than 133,000 people in the United States have died from the coronavirus, and there are now more than 3 million confirmed cases. In the last 28 days alone, 1 million new infections were reported. 33 states are seeing their numbers rising. This country is now averaging more than 52,000 new cases a day.
Surprisingly, after Joe Biden became president, what happened? They quickly stopped showing the death toll. I wonder why. Bottom line, Dems had a very strong incentive to inflict as much pain as possible in the final months of Trump's first term, and that's what they did in my view. They didn't realize that they brainwashed a large chunk of their base in the process, and the only good thing about all of this is that it showed everyone who these people really are, how tyrannical, how power hungry the left is. Even in America, even in this country, they could force that many people into submission. Never again. Never, ever again. That's what I say. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.